Censorship within the film industry in America began in the 1930s with the Motion Picture Production Code, also known as the Hays Code. At first, this was set up as a small jury to review films for content. This was largely mocked by industry insiders. This changed in 1934 when the American bishops of the Roman Catholic Church organized the Legion of Decency with the support of Protestant and Jewish organizations, and they began boycotting films they thought were to be unacceptable. The BBFC. The BBFC was founded in 1912. It was originally known as the British Board of Film Censors. Initially, the BBFC was used to monitor health and safety as early film stock and limelight, which were used when projecting films with fire hazards. The BBFC was then set up by the film industry to standardize the rating of films. The BBFC is an independent, non-governmental body funded by charged fees. Filmmakers have always paid to have their films rated. The history of BBFC. Initially, there were 2 age rating certificates, U and A. There were originally 2 examiners, however, in the 1920s, there were 4, including a woman. The BBFC didn't have written rules like the Hays Code. Policy evolved along practical lines and sought to reflect public attitudes. Since the 2000s, the BBFC has operated under published guidelines. These guidelines are flexible, and the content of each individual piece of work is taken into consideration. BBFC Classification Guidelines. The BBFC's classification standards reflect people's views and expectations and what they find acceptable for each rating. To ensure this, every 4 to 5 years, the BBFC carries out a major public consultations to find out what people think about the age rating system used for films and videos. If the consultations find significant changes in people's views and expectations, they adjust their standards and criteria accordingly. The BBFC has 2 main principles. These are to protect children and vulnerable adults from potentially harmful or otherwise unsuitable content, to help children and families choose what's right for them and avoid what's not. Age ratings. U. Suitable for all. A U film should be suitable for audiences aged 4 and over. U films should be set within a positive framework and should offer reassuring counterbalances for any violence, threat or horror. Dangerous or antisocial behaviour which young children might copy must be clearly disapproved of. No emphasis on realistic or easily accessible weapons. Discriminatory language or behaviour is unlikely to be acceptable unless clearly disapproved of. References to illegal drugs or drug misuse must be infrequent, harmless and inoffensive, or have a clear educational purpose to anti-drug message suitable for young children. Infrequent use only of very mild bad language. Only occasional nudity with no sexual content. Only very mild sexual behaviour, kissing for example. Scary or potentially unsettling sequences should be mild, brief and likely to cause undue anxiety to young children. Violence will be very mild. Mild violence is acceptable if it is comedic, animated or unrealistic. PG. Parental guidance. PG-rated films are for general viewing, but some scenes may be unsuitable for young children. A PG film shouldn't unsettle children aged 8 or over. Children of any age may watch, but parents are advised to consider whether the content would upset younger children. The guidelines for a PG rated are: no detail of danger. 12 and 12A, suitable for 12 years and older. Films classified 12A and 12 that is not suitable for young children under the age of 12. Children younger than 12 may see a 12A film in a cinema, but if they are with an adult. Children younger than 12 can't rent or buy a 12 rated film. The guidelines for 12A and 12 rated films are: no promotion of potentially dangerous behaviour which children are likely to copy, no glamorization of realistic or easily acceptable weapons such as knives, no endorsement of antisocial behaviour. Discriminatory language or behaviour must not be endorsed by the work as a whole. Aggressive language or behaviour is unlikely to be acceptable unless clearly disapproved of. Misuse of drugs must be infrequent and should not be glamorized or give detailed instruction. There may be moderate bad language. Strong language may be permitted, depending on the way it is used, who is using the language, its frequency within the work as a whole, and any special contextual justification. There may be nudity, but in a sexual content it must be brief and discreet. Sexual activity may be briefly and discreetly portrayed. Moderate sex references are permitted, but frequent crude references are unlikely to be acceptable. There may be moderate physical and psychologic threat and horror sequences. Although some scenes may be disturbing, the overall tone should not be. Horror sequences should not be frequent or sustained. There may be moderate violences, but it should not dwell on detail. There should be no emphasis or injuries or blood, but occasionally gory moments may be permitted if justified by the content. (15) Suitable for 15 years and older. No one younger than 15 may see a 15 film in a cinema. No one younger than 15 may rent or buy a 15 rated film. The guidelines for 15 rated films are: dangerous behaviour, for example suicide or self-harming, should not dwell on detail which could be copied. Whether depiction of easily accessible weapons is acceptable depend on factors such as realism, context, and setting. The work must not endorse discriminatory language or behaviour, although there may be racist, homophobic, or other discriminatory themes and language. Drug taking may be shown, but the work must not promote or encourage drug misuse, for example, through detailed instruction. The misuse of easily accessible and highly dangerous substances, for example, aerosols or solvents, is unlikely to be acceptable. There may be a strong language. Very strong language may be permitted depending on the way it is used, who is using the language, its frequency within the work as a whole, any special contextual justification. There are no constraints on nudity in a non-sexual or educational context. Sexual nudity may be permitted, but strong detail is likely to be brief or presented in a comic context. Sexual activity may be portrayed, but usually without strong detail. There may be strong verbal references to sexual behaviour, repeated very strong references, particularly those using pornographic language, are likely to be acceptable. Works whose primary purpose is sexual arousal are unacceptable. There may be strong verbal references to sexual violence, but any description of the stronger forms of sexual violence, including rape, must not be detailed or prolonged. A strong and sustained focus on sexual threat is unacceptable. There may be strong and threat and horror. A sustained focus on sadistic threat is unlikely to be acceptable. Violence may be strong, but should not dwell on the infliction of pain or injury. The strongest gory image is unlikely to be acceptable. 15. Suitable for 15 years and older. No one younger than 15 may see a 15 film in a cinema. No one younger than 15 may rent or buy a 15 rated film. The guidelines for 15 rated films are: dangerous behaviour, for example suicide or self-harming, should not dwell on detail which could be copied. Whether depiction of easily accessible weapons is acceptable depend on factors such as realism, context, and setting. The work must not endorse discriminatory language or behaviour, although there may be racist, homophobic, or other discriminatory themes and language. Drug taking may be shown, but the work must not promote or encourage drug misuse, for example, through detailed instruction. The misuse of easily accessible and highly dangerous substances, for example, aerosols or solvents, is unlikely to be acceptable. There may be a strong language. Very strong language may be permitted depending on the way it is used, who is using the language, its frequency within the work as a whole, any special contextual justification. There are no constraints on nudity in a non-sexual or educational context. Sexual nudity may be permitted, but strong detail is likely to be brief or presented in a comic context. Sexual activity may be portrayed, but usually without strong detail. There may be strong verbal references to sexual behaviour, repeated very strong references, particularly those using pornographic language, are likely to be acceptable. Works whose primary purpose is sexual arousal are unacceptable. There may be strong verbal references to sexual violence, but any description of the stronger forms of sexual violence, including rape, must not be detailed or prolonged. A strong and sustained focus on sexual threat is unacceptable. There may be strong and threat and horror. A sustained focus on sadistic threat is unlikely to be acceptable. Violence may be strong, but should not dwell on the infliction of pain or injury. The strongest gory image is unlikely to be acceptable. Strong sadistic violence is also unlikely to be acceptable. 18. Suitable for 18 years and older. No one younger than 18 may see an 18 film in a cinema. No one younger than 18 may rent or buy 18 rated films. Adults should be free to choose their own entertainment. Exceptions to this are the following areas: where the material is in a breach of a criminal law or has been created through a commission of a criminal offence. Where material or treatment appears to us to risk harm to individuals or, through their behaviour, to society, for example, the detailed portrayal of violent or dangerous acts or of illegal drug use which may cause harm to public health or morals. R18. To be shown only in especially licensed cinemas or supplied only in licensed sex shops, to adults only. The R18 category is a special and legally restricted classification primarily for explicit works of consenting sex or strong fetish material involving adults. Films may only be shown to adults in especially licensed cinemas, or films may be supplied to adults only in licensed sex shops. R18 films may not be supplied by mail order. What scenes were considered inappropriate for audiences in the 30s and why? In the 30s, the Hays Code prohibited a movie from lowering the moral standards of those who see it. The Hays Code also called for depictions of the correct standards of life. As well as this, it forbade a movie for showing any sort of ridicule toward the law or creating sympathy for its violation. Other things that couldn't be depicted in movies these include headings of crimes against the law, sex, vulgarity, obscenity, profanity, consume, dances, religion, locations, national feelings and repellent subjects. At the time, the content that seemed inappropriate was horror and gangster films, and films that dealt with certain aspects of sexuality. These kinds of scenes were inappropriate from the 30s to the late 40s. What scenes were considered inappropriate for audiences in the 40s and why? In the 1940s, foreign films influenced the American movie market with their realistic portrayals of life. Great access to these types of films put pressure on Hollywood to produce more mature content. This put pressure on the Production Code Administration to allow filmmakers more artistic freedom. The content in films in the 1940s still had to abide by the rules of the Hays Code. At this time, the kind of scenes that caused concern included horror and gangster films. This is like the 1930s. What scenes were considered inappropriate for audiences in the 50s and why? At this time, controversial subjects in film accommodated for by the new X rating in the UK. During this period, there were concerns about teenage criminality and juvenile delinquents. These concerns delayed the classification of Laszlo Benedek's 1954 film The Wild One for 13 years because the BBFC described the content as a spectacle of unbridled hooliganism. Antisocial behaviour and teen violence was also seen as inappropriate. Due to this, Nicholas Ray's 1955 Rebel Without a Cause ran into trouble because of its depiction of what the BBFC considered to be antisocial behaviour and teen violence. Other scenes that were considered inappropriate were nudity and drugs. 1955, The Garden of Eden only showed bare breasts and buttocks, but it was seen as unacceptable. Devil's Weed was rejected in 1951 because the BBFC felt that the moral lessons about the evils of drugs weren't made clear. What is the difference between censor and censure? To censor means to remove, block or interfere with the communication of another. In relation to censors in films and TV, it means that they remove content from a film or TV show and block it from being released to the public. Whereas to censure means to find fault and criticise and blameworthy. In relation to censures in TV and film, it means that they issue an apology after content that has been released to the public has caused offence. In some instances, they may blame someone for a mistake made regarding the content. BBFC cuts for category. The BBFC can offer cuts for category if the film submitted is suitable for age rating but at a rating higher than the one requested. This means that if the age rating requested can be achieved by making minor changes and cuts the BBFC may offer the submitting company the option. An example of cuts for category is 2017's Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle, which was cut to reduce the volume and intensity of the violent action and weapon glamorization in order to obtain a 12A rating. BBFC compulsory cuts. If a film raises issues or concerns that cannot be addressed by a rating, cuts or other changes may be required as a condition of rating. Types of content that might require cuts are content which may promote illegal activity, content which is obscene or otherwise illegal, content created by means of the commission of a criminal offence, portrayals of children in a sexualized or abusive context, sexual violence or sexualized violence which endorses or exercises the behaviour, sadistic violence or torture which invites the viewer to identify with the perpetrator in a way which raises a risk of harm, graphic images of real injury, violence or death presented in a salacious or sensationalist manner which risks harm by encouraging or sadistic attitudes, sex works which contain material listed as unacceptable at R18, When the issue relates to the circumstances of filming, for example in relation to animal cruelty or public indecency, the submitting company will normally be given an opportunity to present evidence before a final decision is reached. What is Ofcom and what do they do? Ofcom, also known as the Office of Communications, is the regulator for the communication services that we use daily. Ofcom ensures people get the best from their broadband, home phone and mobile services, as well as keeping an eye on TV and radio. They also oversee the Universal Postal Service and airwaves used by wireless devices. They also ensure people don't get scammed or are protected from bad practices. There's a broadcasting code that has been published by Ofcom. It is the responsibility of the broadcasters to comply with the code. The most recent version of the code took effect on January the 1st, 2019. Complaints can be made of Ofcom regarding TV and radio shows. They assess complaints carefully to see if the rules have been broken. Ofcom Broadcasting Code. General outlines. The Broadcasting Code has many different rules under different sections. There are 10 main sections within the Broadcasting Code and 2 different codes that are part of the Broadcasting Code. Section 1, Protecting the Under-18s. This outlines the rules around scheduling and content information in programs with regard to protecting children under the age of 18. Section 2, Harm and Offence. This outlines standards for broadcast contents so as to provide adequate protection for members of the public from harmful and or offensive material. Section 3, Crime, Disorder, Hatred and Abuse. This covers material that is likely to incite crime or disorder, reflecting Ofcom's duty to prohibit the broadcast of this type of programming. Section 4, Religion. This relates to the responsibility of broadcasters with respect to the content of religious programs. Section 5, Due Impartiality and Due Accuracy. To ensure that news, in whatever form, is reported with due accuracy and presented with due impartiality. To ensure that the special impartiality requirements of the Acts are complied with. Section 6, Elections and Referendums. This covers the special impartiality requirements and other legislations that must be applied at the time of elections and referendums. Section 7, Fairness. This section is to ensure that broadcasters avoid unjust and unfair treatment of individuals or organisations in programmes. Section 8, Privacy. This section is to ensure that broadcasters avoid any unwarranted infringement of privacy in programmes and in connection with obtaining material included in programmes. Section 9, Commercial References in TV. This relates to broadcasters' editorial independence and control over programming, with a distinction between editorial content and advertising. Section 10, Commercial Communications on Radio. This section relates to radio broadcasts only and is to ensure that transparency of commercial communications as a means to secure consumer protection. Ofcom Broadcasting Code. Cross-promotion code and on-demand program service rules. Cross-promotion code. Subject to the cross-promotion code, television broadcasts are able to promote programs, channels and or other broadcasting-related services without such promotions being considering advertising included in the calculation of advertising minutage. On-demand program service rules. These rules ensure that cross-promotions on television are distinct from advertising and inform viewers of services that are likely to be interesting to them as viewers, and ensure that promotions on television outside of programs do not prejudice fair and effective competition. Ofcom investigation, Big Brother. In June 2012, Ofcom received 1,225 complaints about Channel 5's Big Brother, after incidents including a black contestant being called a griller and housemates labelled retards. 3 incidents were investigated to see if they breached the UK Broadcasting Code. The incident that caused the most complaints from viewers, 1,108 in total, involved housemates Conor McIntyre being abusive to Miss India UK. Dina Upal McIntyre was warned about his behaviour by Big Brother. He used a string of expletives and called her a piece of shit. This occurred at 9:40 p.m. on 25th of June on Channel 5. The second incident involved housemate Caroline Moran calling Adam Kelly, a black contestant, a ridiculous griller with no sanitation. This received 114 complaints from viewers about the perceived racial slur, which occurred on the 28th of June at 9:10. The third incident occurred on the 4th of July. A former Big Brother housemate, Victor Ebro, appeared on Channel 5, the Big Brother spin-off show Bit on the Side. Ebro referred to the housemate as functioning retards. This promoted 3 complaints to Ofcom. The incident occurred at 11:20 p.m. A spokesperson from Channel 5 is committed to complying with Ofcom's broadcasting code and will help to face a speed investigation into this particular episode of Big Brother and Big Brother's Bit on the Side. What is Watershed and what guidelines are in place? The Watershed prevents children from seeing unsuitable material. Ofcom defines as everything from sexual content to violence, graphic on distressing imagery and swearing. On free-to-air television, the Watershed starts at 9 p.m. and ends at 5:30 a.m. However, on premium channels, the Watershed starts at 8 p.m. and ends at 6 a.m. Programs that contain strong material such as heavy use of swearing or extreme violence must be shown later in the evening or further reduce the chance of the content being seen by children. When and why was Watershed introduced? The Watershed was introduced in the 1964 Television Act, which based on research such as the 1958 television. This recommended that television channels acted responsibility when scheduling programs and recognising that parents couldn't monitor all television viewing before 9 p.m. Does the Watershed work? Ofcom states that 74% of the general public and 76% of parents believe that 9 p.m. is the right time for the Watershed. This was according to biannual consultations with the public. Ofcom takes action against broadcasters who don't adhere to the Watershed rules and has found 350 programs that have breached guidelines since 2004. My opinion on censorship? I believe that censorship protects young children from seeing inappropriate content. It also stops extremely offensive content that could negatively influence and impact the public. Over the years, I feel that society as a whole has been desensitized over time due to the internet and social media. I think this means that we find more things acceptable. Movies for children and young children seem to have more mature themes. However, I believe that censorship can restrict filmmakers as if their films are rated 18. They have a smaller audience. This means that filmmakers have to heavily censor a film to get a wider audience. My opinion on censorship? I believe that censorship protects young children from seeing inappropriate content. It also stops extremely offensive content that could negatively influence and impact the public. Over the years, I feel that society as a whole has been desensitized over time due to the internet and social media. I think this means that we find more things acceptable. Movies for children and young children seem to have more mature themes. However, I believe that Censorship can restrict filmmakers as if their films are rated 18, they have a smaller audience. This means that filmmakers have to heavily censor a film to get a wider audience.